You're listening to the Entrepreneurs Next Door podcast.
Work's been breaking my back, already packing my bags. Punch that time card like a ticket out of here.
A big city international investment banker turned kitchen school owner in small town Haddonfield. This gives you an idea of Kathy Gold's story. Her commitment to community and relationship using food as the primary vehicle won't be lost on you as you hear her story in her own words. Keep your ears tuned to find out her perspective on what success actually is. Enjoy this episode with Kathy Gold from In the Kitchen Cooking School. All right, so this is Barry Hoover with Entrepreneurs Next Door. And our guest today is Kathy Gold from In the Kitchen Cooking School. Today's September 6, 2018. And Kathy, first of all, thank you for letting us meet here in your space. And second, for cutting out time to speak with us today. Very excited to have you on.
Well, thanks so much. Pleasure.
For our jumping point, your road to In the Kitchen Cooking School here in Haddonfield, New Jersey, is a full road, which I'm excited to hear about. And I know any listeners will appreciate the story as well. And so if you could give that highlighted road that brought you here, we would love to hear. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, sure. I always like to tell the strange meandering tale of my culinary creations here. And so I was in school, studied Chinese language and literature, which I used not at all, as most people don't necessarily use their college major, and started a career in investment banking. And for 20 years was international investment banking. Had a baby whom I never saw, and so decided needed to take a break from that. And so I really retired until she was about 3 years old, when she started a program called 3-Day Threes. And then I was stuck at home doing nothing, feeling like a total slacker, and really needed to reinvent my life. And so taking a look at all the things that I had done and where my passions were, I knew that I had to be doing something in culinary arts, which is not my background at all. But when I was in college in Georgetown, worked for a bit at a restaurant called Bistro Francais, which was right on M Street in Georgetown, and just fell in love with it, fell in love with the world, fell in love with the work, and just really loved the atmosphere of being in a high volume, always moving, always exciting restaurant. And so needed to do something. Knew it wasn't a restaurant, but really started thinking about where I could be and created a life for myself as a private chef working for specific clients on specific days, doing menu consultation and recipe development and food styling. And worked for myself for a very long time. I didn't know I was an entrepreneur until I actually became an entrepreneur. I mean, I didn't even know what that word was at the time, but it really evolved into something different from that, but including that. And so I was invited to guest teach at a cooking school. And as I was there, it was, this is really it. I was doing something and felt like, I love this. And the idea in my head, if I continue to do this, I won't have to work anymore ever. And that's that moment when you think, oh my gosh, if I'm working but it doesn't feel like work and I'm getting paid money to do it, this is really what we're looking for. And so worked and really became a guest chef, a permanent guest chef, and helped create a culinary program, and went on from there and was cooking at a store that decided to close their culinary program. And so I opened one, and I was retrofitted into a kitchen design studio in Moorestown, and had a couple of classes a week. It wasn't really my space. And then the owner of the building took on a new partner who decided no equipment can be used. It needs to be in pristine condition. I began looking for a space for my own school. And it was my daughter, who was quite young. I've been here 11 years, so she was really young, and found this space in Haddonfield on Craigslist, of all things. I didn't know that Craigslist was a thing, but she sure did. And I came to look at it and took over the lease from somebody who had run a shabby chic, very upscale shabby chic home furnishing store here, and decided to take over her lease. It was not an easy path, but it was a fun one. I had to have a landlord with a vision, because he was told by almost everyone in this town that a cooking school could never survive here, and was he out of his mind to rent this space to me? And luckily he was out of his mind, because I did rent the space, and off we go. So I had always told him from the start, if he anticipated selling, give me right of first refusal, which a couple years in he did. And so, proud owner.
That's awesome. That's awesome. How long, just to make sure I get notes down here, how long have you been in the space that we're sitting today?
It will be 11 years in September, really October. I had contracted with a company. I had to gut the space and build a kitchen, and hired everybody, had everything in place, had everything ordered. Went to France thinking I would come back and it would be almost completed. Came back to find that nothing had been done. But I think that that's a pretty typical story. So we went on from there. It was a little bit of a delay. But there we go.
When going back to the part of the story with your daughter being so young and you were not around, and you're like, okay, I'm going to change something here. When she was at that 3-year-old, that age, that desire in your heart for all things like culinary arts, cooking wise, where did that originate for you? Was it a childhood thing? Was it just simply on the surface, being in restaurants, how I can get into this? Where did that culinary arts passion start in your view?
I always talk about my food memories as a child, which were mostly, sorry to say, really bad food memories if it was home cooking. But because my parents were not involved in home cooking in any way, we went to fabulous restaurants. And so I had a taste for what fine food or very well prepared food could be. And so I always enjoyed that. And when I was in high school, started cooking, and I had a friend who was like a really 60s kind of hippie guy, and I wanted to cook vegetables and brown rice. I had this very romanticized notion in my mind of what that could be. And he came in and he cooked it, but really what I wanted to know was how to do that myself. And so it was always trying to create something, having flavors in my mind that I wanted to somehow get onto the plate. And so really discovering that in terms of that kind of an education. And when I was in college and walked into bistro in DC, my heart started to pound, and I didn't even know what that reaction was, what I was feeling in there. But I was so drawn to the entire space and the culture and the aromas and just the conviviality and the hospitality that was shown there. And I knew that that was my world, and I had to really figure out a way to get into that. And truly, it wasn't until 20 years later, after finishing and going through my first career, my original career, that I was able to make that happen. And so really try to find a way to be in that world without opening a restaurant.
Right. When you have classes here in the school itself, is that really the meeting point of your passion for the culture of good food and hospitality? Is this where they meet for you?
Exactly right. It's really a sharing. So in a class, we can have a design, and I'll put together the menu and create the recipes for what I want to teach and what I want to have people think about. And we go far off that path almost every class, because something will click in my mind or someone will ask a question, and then we're down into a completely different road and talking about the food and what it is and the history of it. And I think it's something that people really enjoy, and they talk about it long after that. Wow, that went in a different direction. But if it's my business and I can do that, that's even more of a benefit to everybody. And we're all learning from each other, and it's like just a new way of thinking about it.
As somebody who cooking is not a strong suit of mine, as far as approach goes, to be able to take fine food, like you mentioned from an early age, you had it at restaurants, fine food, to have it be accessible to regular people cooking. Has that been a common theme for you, like in the groups that come in here that you teach? Is that a common kind of avenue for you, to try and make both sides accessible to each other?
Always starting with the concepts of what it is we're trying to create, and then how to pass that information along in a way that's inclusive and non-threatening and understandable, and breaking it down to the very elements that everybody can say, oh, I see what's happening here. I'm going to be able to do that by myself. And then I'm going to just take those ideas and plug in my own family's favorite flavors with that same technique and build on it, and then it becomes their recipe.
Being the entrepreneur, like you said, you kind of were already one before you knew exactly what that title was. Would you go so far as to say that that's a calling in your life, as being an entrepreneur, insofar as your own business taking on special meaning more than just income or to provide? Would you go so far to say it's a calling for you?
It has become a calling. I didn't know that it was. I was at the top of my game in the investment world. In that kind of environment, you really do have your own clients. You're running your own portfolios. There is a management company above you. You need a place to have your stocks traded and all of the vehicles for investing implemented somehow that is independent of me. But having my own business, making the decisions day in and day out, ultimately being responsible for every bill that comes in, is daunting and not for the faint of heart. But boy, I recommend it to everyone. If you can make that space for yourself, it's the way to go.
I was one of the points that I actually wanted to get to was to have the ear of somebody who is considering some type of venture, where they are their own boss, like self-employment wise. If you could expound just a little bit on what you just shared, if there's one point or two that you could speak into that listener, what would that be? Something that would have helped you at that beginning spot?
Get the help that you need. If you don't have the expertise in something, find someone who does. And there are so many opportunities, some of which are free, and free doesn't mean substandard. There are a lot of retired executives who live to pass along their information. Tap into that. Join as many networking organizations as you can, and fund your goal. I can't emphasize enough how important your financial plan is to your success.
At this spot for you, and I know it changes for all different business owners and even in different fields, but success. What is success to you at this stage? What is that question? How do you answer that today?
It is different than it used to be. And I was talking to a great friend from Chicago who owned a really well-known business restaurant for dozens upon dozens of years. And she was talking about the concept of saying yes. And I really started thinking about that, because when we're first starting our businesses, we have to say no to a lot of things because we need to preserve what we have. We need to really have our heads down. We need to be fully in control and building our business. But once you've reached a certain level, you kind of take a look around and say, this is great. This is almost on autopilot. Let me see where I can give back and how I can help raise other people up. If somebody needs something, feel free to ask me, and I'm available. And that's really what it is, having the business at a point where you can say yes to things.
I love the giving back phrase that you had, and I know, for example, later today you have some responsibility and some duty with the food truck festival that's going on here in downtown Haddonfield, and if you could take a minute to kind of share about how giving back and being in a downtown area like this, Haddonfield, how they kind of coexist for you. I would love to hear your perspective on that, because you do both really well. Being in a downtown close-knit and the giving back part is unique. So if you could just share your heart for that a little bit.
Well, it's a funny, I have to know what's going on where I am. I have to make sure that the environment where my space is, where my building is a thriving downtown. Yeah. And so I have a responsibility to volunteer and to do things that are going to help that along. There are a lot of paid positions in this town, and I sure don't have one of them. I sit on the board of the Partnership for Haddonfield, and I'm also the co-chair of the marketing committee. And it's just because we want it to thrive. We want everyone to thrive in their businesses here. It works so well for everybody else. And so if you have an extra couple of hours a week or a month or whatever it is, it's your job to go out and make sure that other people have what they need.
Your history here in Haddonfield, when you looked, for example, for the space, was being in a downtown setting, was that like a non-negotiable for you? Or did it just kind of fit a couple of your pieces and it just happened to be one of the best towns, in New Jersey?
Until I got here, I knew Haddonfield. I've come here. I came here as a kid to shop with my mother for back-to-school shoes somewhere on Kings Highway, and of course I've shopped in a number of stores here as I've gone along. And I wasn't necessarily thinking of Haddonfield. I had looked in other towns. I looked in a town that had 23 open storefronts the day that I looked, and that didn't seem to be what I was looking for. And single standing spaces in Cherry Hill and other areas. And truly, it was my daughter when she found this space, and I came through Haddonfield and looked in the windows. It was closed at that point, and said, wow, this is really something. This town is spectacular. There were people on the street. There were parking. It was really nice, and it just seemed perfect for what I was looking for. It was really amazing. That's a good find. A good home.
Last thing. Having a young daughter while spearheading, the kitchen, the cooking school, what advice, or looking back, what suggestions would you give for somebody who has to balance that life of home life and starting a business or growing it to a level that they want? If you could share one or two things to kind of help that person, what would that be?
Make the time that you need for family life. It's one of the most important things, and that is your rock of support if you have that. It's so easy when you're building a business to dive in head first and spend 24/7 doing that, but you really need to give yourself the time. You need the downtime, you need the head clearing time. And so I build that right into your day plan. We say ADL, activities of daily living.
All right. Kathy, there was a lot jammed in to our 20 minutes.
I talk fast, right?
A lot jammed into our 20, and going from corporate, to small business, to me still is so unique, and so to me it's cool, and for someone to have the courage and the boldness to make that step. If you had one ending, all-encompassing perspective on small business for entrepreneurs, whether they know they're an entrepreneur or not, kind of your perspective on it. What could you leave us with? Something that could be grand, like macro level, big scale. What is something you can give like a parting point for us?
I will say have a plan so that you can follow your passion, and don't lose sight of your end goal. And yet at the same time, leave yourself open to how that might change and what that might look like in the future as you're going forward. And don't be afraid to push off in another direction. And don't be afraid to abandon something that's not working for you.
Be fearless then. Kathy, thank you. Thank you so much for the space, for your time. And thank you for your commitment to Haddonfield, downtown Haddonfield. I know to you it's kind of like just what you do, but it deserves to be recognized, and thank you for the commitment to the town.
Oh, thanks for that.
Special.
And thanks for the talk. Great.